All right, welcome everyone. So today we are here for the debate, Is Darwinian Evolution a Fact? Between Sabor Ahmad and Dave Farina. So thanks everyone for coming. First of all, I'll just briefly introduce myself and before introducing our two speakers here. Sorry, I've got the stream open in the background like a numpty. All right, there we go. So my name is James Fodor. I am a PhD student at the University of Melbourne in Australia. So I studied cognitive neuroscience and language. I debated Sabor a few years ago on this topic, and so it's a pleasure to be able to facilitate another debate today. I have a science podcast, The Science of Everything, if anyone's interested in some of my other work, as well as my YouTube channel. But today we are here for the debate between Sabor and Dave, and I'm sure everyone knows the topic, Is Darwinian Evolution a Fact? Before we jump into the debate, I'm just going to introduce our two speakers. So first, speaking for the negative, we have Sabor Ahmad. Sabor is a debater actively engaged in discussions on atheism. He earned a master's degree in philosophy from Bibber College, University of London, with a particular interest in the philosophy of biology. His master's thesis explored methodological adaptationism and junk DNA, which will also be central to his forthcoming book. He is currently a PhD student focusing on theistic evolution and is co-author of the book The Death of Neo-Darwinism, Dawkins versus Noble. Our second speaker speaking for the affirmative today is Dave Farina. So Dave is a science communicator and generalist, best known for his YouTube channel, Professor Dave Explains. While the channel is primarily a database of academic tutorials to help students with a variety of subjects, Dave is also passionate about neutralizing disinformation and science denial, from flat earthers and creationists to anti-vaxxers and medical hoaxes. Dave hopes to serve as a beacon towards the rehabilitation of public science literacy. So those are our speakers. Let me just introduce the format of the debate. So first, we're going to have 20 minutes of opening remarks from each of our speakers. So Sabor will go first, followed by Dave, and then each will have 10 minutes of rebuttal. So following that, there'll be 30 minutes of open discussion, which I will facilitate, where I'll present questions and the speakers can also ask each other questions. And to conclude, there'll be 2 minutes of summary, of concluding summary from each of our speakers. Just as a final note, so I hope everyone, including our speakers, as well as those in the audience, will remain respectful and on topic. Also, just a reminder for the speakers that I will be enforcing the time limits just to ensure that everything remains fair. And also an encouragement for everyone. I know that many people today have come to support one or other of our speakers, which is fine. But I want to encourage everyone to keep an open mind and to think really critically and engage with the material so that hopefully we can all come to a better understanding of these important issues. All right, with that being said, I'll pass over to Sabor, who's going to give 20 minutes of his opening remarks.
Thank you for that, James. Can I get a 1 minute reminder just before I end? Can you hear me? All right, I'll begin. Okay, so the question before us tonight is Darwinian evolution a fact? So the first thing I need to do is define what I mean by Darwinian evolution. Now, I am defining Darwinian evolution as the modern synthesis or neo-Darwinism, and the reason for this is because it's the foundation currently of evolutionary theory. And there are objections to the neo-Darwinian modern synthesis by the likes of James Shapiro, Dennis Noble, and others. Now, this is the big question that's being debated between two great giants of evolutionary theory. In the camp of neo-Darwinism, you have Richard Dawkins, and in the camp of anti-neo-Darwinism, you actually have Dennis Noble. Now, this interesting debate took place about 2 years ago. Both of them went head to head. And what you see in this debate is they are essentially arguing on a very simple point about causality, but then that lifts into other areas. And primarily, they're focusing on Dennis Noble's book, Dance to the Tune of Life, which is published by Cambridge University. So I'm going to be using the arguments of Dennis Noble from this book, which have been battle tested against the likes of Dawkins. Now, there's 4 pillars of neo-Darwinism, according to Dennis Noble, and all 4 of these pillars, according to him, have fallen. The first one is the central dogma, which is DNA to RNA to proteins. There's only one way causation of information. Now, according to him, that's not true. Although the dogma holds in that direction, it is not the only way that information is conveyed. The second pillar is the Weismann barrier. This is the idea that the genome is isolated from the soma cells. The third is the passive vehicle, that the organism is a passive vehicle to retain genes which are active causally in the process of evolution. The last pillar is the pillar of randomness. So what Dennis Noble is challenging is the idea that randomness can actually generate function. He doesn't deny randomness. This is a common straw man that's made against him. However, what he's challenging is the idea that randomness in of itself can generate biological functionality. Now, before I get into the argument, there's some objections that Farina has made in his video. Now, his video is very long. This is only about a minute in which he makes several mistakes. And what I want to do is clarify those. He claims that neo-Darwinism came about in the 1920s and that the modern synthesis came 70 years later, which would mean 1990s. He objected to using these terms interchangeably, and he called Dennis Noble a complete clown. Now, firstly, if you go to the first slide, you can see that biologists are using these terms interchangeably, but I'm going to get into this in more detail and you'll see why they can be used as such. Now, the first claim, neo-Darwinism came about in the 1920s. The problem with this claim is the founders of neo-Darwinism were dead by 1920. So you had Alfred Russel Wallace and August Weismann, who both passed away in 1914 and 1913. So how could neo-Darwinism be put together in the 1920s? Clearly, this doesn't make any historical sense. The second claim, that the modern synthesis came 70 years later, meaning 1990s. Again, another absurd claim. Julian Huxley's book, The Modern Synthesis, which came out in 1942, is testament to the fact that modern synthesis came way before 1990. In fact, he was dead by 1975. Interestingly, there was lots of developments in evolutionary theory during that time. 1976, you had the most popular explanation of the modern synthesis by Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. In 1983, you had McClintock winning the Nobel Prize for discovering the process of genome reorganization, which is a direct challenge to the modern synthesis. So how does it make sense that the modern synthesis came together in the 1990s when all these developments were happening? Clearly, this is absurd. So I'm going to be again referring to Dennis Noble here. Dennis Noble's book is referring to this development of the modern synthesis from neo-Darwinism, and that's why the terms are used interchangeably. He says that in 1896, we first find the usage of the term neo-Darwinism. However, its origins, according to him, go back to the 1870s. And the modern synthesis version of Darwinism, according to him, came together between 1920s and 1950s. So Farina's claims, let's have a look at them. Neo-Darwinism came about in the 1920s. That's false. Modern synthesis came about 70 years later. Again, false. He objected to using these terms interchangeably. And if we go back a few slides, you will see here that both people who are proponents of neo-Darwinism and against neo-Darwinism are both using it interchangeably for the reasons I've already mentioned. So where does that leave us? Someone that has such a primitive understanding of evolutionary theory and its history, what can they actually tell us about this theory? I want you to consider a thought experiment. Imagine a history teacher who claims World War I took place in the 1960s. So JFK was assassinated in the same decade as Franz Ferdinand, as the same decade in which Hitler was in the trenches. What would you say to such a history teacher? Imagine now that this history teacher wanted to give you an international relations analysis of the geopolitical causes of World War I. You'd ask them, excuse me, my friend, please have a seat, have a sandwich, sit down, go apply for supply teaching somewhere else. This is not for you. How can we take someone seriously who doesn't understand the basic timeline of evolutionary theory, yet is adamant that he wants to speak about it? Now let's go to his most absurd claim, which is that Dennis Noble is a complete clown. I want you to just think about that for a second. Here's a man who calls himself a professor. He doesn't have a PhD. He doesn't have a single peer-reviewed paper. He is calling one of the top evolutionary biologists in the world a complete clown. Isn't that rich? So we're going to examine him today and see why he thinks so. Maybe he knows something we don't know. Maybe he can teach us something about Dennis Noble that Richard Dawkins doesn't know and others don't know. Now, normally I don't have to go into who is Dennis Noble during my debates. I refer to him casually. But because he's been called a complete clown, it'd be prudent to explain why he's not a clown. Okay, so let's break down his history. We find that his earliest contributions to evolutionary theory go back to 1962 with the Noble model. We also find that he has been an Oxford professor for decades in that particular field of evolutionary biology. He is a fellow of the Royal Society, and I want to explain what the Royal Society is. The Royal Society is the oldest and the most prestigious society in the world. It is a society which goes back to the 17th century. It is a society in which Charles Darwin himself, in 1858, he actually presented the theory of natural selection. And what you actually find is that the Royal Society is where all of the prestigious conversations are actually happening. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I'm getting interrupted. Sorry, I'm in the break. Yeah, come. No worries. Sorry, I was just interrupted in the middle of that. Hopefully I won't get deducted some time. No, sit down. No worries. Okay, so where was I? The Noble model, 1962. He's a pioneer in systems biology. He was also Dawkins' PhD examiner in 1966. He published over 700 peer-reviewed papers in articles like Nature, the Linnean Society, and other societies. He's published his first book, The Music of Life, with Oxford University. He published his second book, Biological Relativity, with Cambridge University Press. So what does Farina know that these universities don't know? What does Farina know that Nature doesn't know, and science doesn't know, and the Linnean Society doesn't know, and the Royal Society doesn't know? Now, going back to my debate in 2016 with Aaron Ra, I actually referred to the 2016 meeting at the Royal Society, which was set up by Dennis Noble. This is a landmark discussion in which you had the neo-Darwinists and you had the third way evolutionists having a discussion that was again set up by Dennis Noble. So how is this man a clown? I would love Farina to explain the case. Now, Noble's challenge to Dawkins, let me just break down this challenge. His challenge is based upon these 4 pillars, like I mentioned, and all of these were discussed with him in the debate in 2022. So we're going to be going over each challenge one by one. The first challenge is the central dogma, from DNA to RNA to proteins. Now, obviously, that is true. That is what happens. However, that is not the only way that causation works. That is not the only way that information flows. Information can actually go in the other direction through somatic hypermutation. This is one of the examples he brings up in the debate. Somatic hypermutation happens in the immune system when the B cells can actually, like a slot machine, they can actually hold certain parts of the genome constant and hyper random mutate certain parts and come up with antibodies to take on the antigens. So again, another common straw man that we hear about Dennis Noble is that he doesn't believe in randomness. It's the opposite. He believes randomness can be used for functionality, and randomness alone cannot generate functionality on its own. And I've referred to some paper here, and we can discuss this in detail if Farina wants to. The second is the Weismann barrier. The Weismann barrier is the idea that the genome is isolated from the soma cells, from what's happening in the body, what's happening in the environment. Now, this was something that August Weismann put together, hence why we have the origin of neo-Darwinism in the late 19th century, not the 1920s, as Dave Farina seems to think. So why does Dennis Noble challenge the Weismann barrier? He challenges it through the work of Conrad Waddington, who showed that epigenetic markings can actually be assimilated into the genome. So genetic assimilation is something that he discovered in the 1950s, and there's lots of information about this. And Dennis Noble links this to the discovery of extracellular vesicles as well. Randomness. So randomness alone, alongside natural selection, the idea is that genes created us, mind and body, purely through random variations plus natural selection. And this is something that Dennis Noble wants to challenge head on. He doesn't believe in this. He believes that the data shows us it was not randomness, it was actually genome reorganization. And he relies heavily on the work of McClintock, who won the Nobel Prize for her discovery of genome reorganization. And he also relies on James Shapiro, his collaborator in the third way of evolution. One of the papers that he referred to in the debate with Richard Dawkins is the paper from Nature about the initial sequencing of the human genome. This involves yeast, worm, fly, humans, and others. And what we discover in this paper is that there has been genome reorganization rather than point mutations selected over time that led to all of the biological functionality that we actually have. Now, the example he gives is of Lego, which is why you see the Lego blocks there. What he basically says is, imagine a child who simply has Lego blocks, these small little blocks, and you ask them to build a bridge, build a house, build a car, whatever it is. You give another child bricks, but you also give them beams, you give them flooring, you give them walls, you give them tunnels, you give them arches, you give them lots of prefabricated tools. Which kid will build faster? And according to Dennis Noble, it's going to be the second child because of genome reorganization. Hence why he doesn't believe in randomness. Now, let me clarify. He doesn't say randomness doesn't exist. He doesn't believe randomness can generate biological functionality. He thinks other things are at play. Now, another pillar is the passive vehicle. Now, this is the idea that the organism is passive and the genes are active. The genes are the real drivers of causality here. Now, during the discussion, Richard Dawkins and Dennis Noble started to go back and forth on this particular view. Now, Dawkins basically said to Noble, I could take your genome and I could take all of the 3 billion base pairs and I could engrave them in granite. After 10,000 years, I can put them in a sequencing machine and I can make a replica of you, Dennis Noble. And Noble said, no, you can't. He said, you need the egg cell. So Noble is challenging this idea that the organism or the cell is actually passive and the genes are active and the genes are self-replicating. He doesn't believe they can do so. And he gives two examples why. The first reason is epigenetic marking. So he says you would need the egg cell from his mother in 1936. You can't just say that it's going to self-replicate without that, because the epigenetic markings from the experiences that his mother actually went through. The other thing that he points out is that the conditional logic of life is not found in the genome. The if, then, or else, something else, that conditional logic is found in the cell membrane, and those cell membranes are not coded for in the genome. So that's another reason why he believes you cannot say the organism is passive, and why he challenges Richard Dawkins' idea that his DNA can be put into a sequencing machine and another Dennis Noble can come out. He also gives the example of proofreading, that without the cell initiating proofreading, the number of mistakes would be 1 over 10 to the power of 4. And with the cell being involved is 1 in 10 to the power of 10. That's a massive difference. And according to Noble, if we do not have the cell doing proofreading, the organism will simply disintegrate. So you need proofreading. And therefore, he says there can be no neat separation between the gene and the organism. You cannot have this idea of selfish, self-replicating genes. So he believes the fourth pillar has also fallen. Now, what can you do with all of this? You can break it down to a very simple point. The simple point you can break it down to is a point of causality. According to Dennis Noble, there is no blind watchmaker. Remember Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, the idea that random mutations plus natural selection can actually create body and mind. According to Dennis Noble, no, it can't. It is insufficient as a mechanism. He says that the designer has to be at least one-eyed. And the reason why he's saying that is because he believes purpose, agency is alive. It's there in the organism. So it's not just a case where there's a blind watchmaker, there is a one-eyed watchmaker. The nature of their debate is about causality. the nature of causality. What exactly do they mean by cause? In fact, they began off the debate speaking about causality, and in the end, they also went back to causality. So according to Dennis Noble, Aristotle's distinctions about causality is what's going to help the discussion. Now, I'm not going to explain what those distinctions are. I expect Dave Farina to know this because he says Dennis Noble is a complete clown. So I'm going to test him on this, and I'm going to test him on the pillars as well, because he's made a lot of claims, and I want to make sure that he can actually justify them, because any science communicator worth their salt is surely going to make statements which they can justify. Lastly, we have this Nature article that was published last year by Dennis Noble. This, he believes, is a tipping point in evolutionary theory, and he believes that it's time for us to move away from the gene-centric neo-Darwinistic view. Now, Dave Farina has a dilemma in front of him. The dilemma is very simple. The dilemma is this: if he attacks Dennis Noble, tries to challenge the four pillars, which according to Noble have fallen, he tries to challenge Dennis Noble's idea of causality, he will look incompetent. And the reason he'll look incompetent is someone as competent as Richard Dawkins couldn't address him. In fact, Richard Dawkins in that debate was on the back foot, and he couldn't address any of the contentions of Dennis Noble. So what will Farina do instead? The second horn of the dilemma is to just be a coward, just to simply cower down and avoid speaking about Dennis Noble. Now, being a coward is worse than being incompetent. So it's better for Farina to try and take on Dennis Noble. However, to be incompetent, you need to show a level of competence. So that's a secondary dilemma. Would Dave Farina even understand and articulate and make the viewers understand what Dennis Noble is actually saying? I very much doubt it. So he will not be able to go down the incompetence rule because he's not competent enough to show that he's incompetent. He will have to go down the cowardice rule. So this is the way that this debate is going to take place. In the 3-hour video that Dave Farina made, he didn't give a shred of evidence that Dennis Noble is a complete clown. But today, I'm going to hold him to account, and I'm going to check if he's going to give us a present. And the present I'm hoping he's going to give us is what Richard Dawkins couldn't deliver in the debate with Dennis Noble, which is, why is Dennis Noble wrong? I'm looking forward to hearing from Farina on his thoughts, and I'm looking forward for him to justify his statements about evolutionary theory's origin and its history, and his comments about Dennis Noble.
All right. Thanks, Sabor. So that concludes his opening remarks. So we now have, let me reset the timer. I think you had like 30 seconds left. All right. So we now have 20 minutes for Dave to present his opening remarks.
All right, so this is supposed to be a debate about evolution. As you can already see, there will be very little discussion of actual science because Sabor is incapable of it. He doesn't actually understand any of the things he's referencing. Instead, these are the things he does. He fixates on the definitions of words and distorts them. He hides behind philosophical jargon. He misquotes scholars, pretends they support his lies, and shouts a lot, typically. So we'll discuss the details of the distortions in the debate, but for now, let's hear from Sabor's super-duper favorite philosopher, Elliot Sober, that Sabor distorts what he says and others. So this is straight from the horse's mouth here. So we can immediately see that whenever Sabor is quoting people, referencing people, we can be pretty sure that he's lying. And since he has no ability
Sorry,
to
Dave, can you hear me? So the audience weren't able to hear that, I'm afraid.
Oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why that is.
That's strange. Well, I'm sorry, but if you go to Skydive Phil's channel, you can see it. Sober is explicitly stating that Sabor misrepresents him. So it's a shame you couldn't hear it, but that's what he says. So you can be pretty sure that that's exclusively what Sabor does, and he doesn't actually have the ability to discuss any of these scientific topics. He's just going, Noble says this, Sober says that. That's pretty much all he does. So he basically has no argument. To prove his incompetence, you just need to look at the title of this debate. He insists on this debate with this ridiculous title over and over again, and it's completely meaningless. First, let's talk about the part with Darwinian evolution. So let's make it perfectly clear that he doesn't actually know what Darwinian evolution means. He regularly says it's the current evolutionary paradigm. It isn't. So yeah, it's a model from the 19th century. He's trying now to obfuscate and talk about neo-Darwinism, conflate it with all these other models. That's not what the title of the debate is. I'm going to stick to the title of the debate. And so it is the case that nobody in the field refers to themselves as Darwinists or subscribing exclusively to Darwinian evolution. It's outdated and used mainly by creationists to try to reduce an entire field of science down to the utterances of a single prophet. So, Darwinian evolution refers to descent with modification and natural selection. That's all. It sounds like he wants to talk about neo-Darwinism, but that's not what he called the debate. So that's his bad. So again, Darwin didn't know anything about genetics. He didn't know about DNA, anything like that. No concept of mutation. Neo-Darwinism, he's taking this reaction video I did where I spoke off the cuff, trying to remember dates. So, okay, I said 1920s. He's right. Around the turn of the 20th century, Neo-Darwinism was coined to incorporate aspects of Mendelian genetics, though still nothing about DNA. And then modern synthesis, right? If you want to refer to extended synthesis, whatever syntheses you want to refer to, once we understood DNA and all of these other evolutionary mechanisms, we started talking about a new paradigm here. And so what important thing to understand for this debate is that Darwinism is in the middle. It is part of the modern synthesis. So variation being acted upon by natural selection is still an enormous part of evolution. Absolutely zero biologists reject this idea. Each model encapsulates the prior. Nothing is lost. More is simply added. So Sabor is going to imply that Noble, all these other people, are pushing alternatives to Darwinism. They don't. It's in there. Now the bit about being a fact. Sabor doesn't actually know what a fact is. Objects and concepts are not facts. Would you say that a chair is a fact? That doesn't mean anything. A fact is a singular datum. We could say that that chair exists. That's a fact. Statements can be facts. Scientific facts are observations that have been repeated so many times so as to make their veracity beyond reasonable doubt, but they are never assigned any kind of supreme certainty. They are subject to revision, no matter how unlikely. So, for example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. That's been true every time anyone has ever done it, but you never know. To bring this back to the debate title, scientific concepts are not facts. We wouldn't say gravity is a fact. That doesn't mean anything. But we could say that gravity factually exists, just as we would say that evolution by Darwinian mechanisms factually occurs. So, unlike a fact, which is a singular datum, a theory is a model that correlates a variety of disparate data and explains them all elegantly in a singular model, which makes falsifiable predictions. Theories can yield facts. I'm sure Sabor would agree that it is a fact that the Earth goes around the sun, and yet this understanding is called heliocentric theory. Demonstrating his confusion, Sabor constantly claims that facts are absolute, certain, not subject to revision. This is false. He contrasts this with theories, which to him are hopelessly uncertain, subject to eternal revision, and can never be proven. This just shows that Sabor doesn't actually even know what science is. Proof is for mathematics and logic. Science doesn't prove anything ever. This creates problems for Sabor's flawed epistemology. Here is a fact derived from a theory. Is it absolute or not? Could we make an observation that could overturn the fact that the Earth goes around the sun? If yes, facts are absolute. If no, theories can be absolute. To get more clarity, let's distinguish between a priori knowledge and a posteriori knowledge. A priori knowledge is that which is gathered through reason alone. This is limited to things like the perfect imaginary world of mathematics, where we can make deductions free from actual experience. A posteriori knowledge means through observation, which is literally all of science. If there is uncertainty here, if this is invalid, then it applies to all of science. This implies that we have no certainty about the shape of the Earth or atoms existing or anything like that. So if Sabor wants to take this extreme philosophical stance, then he must explain why he is exclusively freaking out about evolution, and most specifically about common ancestry for humans and other apes. Why not all the same fuss over heliocentrism? Because this science challenges his baseless faith. In science, once theories hold up after decades or even centuries of verification through rigorous testing, we say that they are consistent beyond reasonable doubt. Never do theories become facts, never do they become laws, never do we regard them as absolute, but simply so incredibly consistent with reality that it would be unreasonable to presume that they are not true. Evolution is one such theory, along with germ theory, heliocentrism, and others, in an effort to distinguish something like heliocentrism from theories he doesn't like evolution. Sabor might say that the Earth going around the sun is a fact because it's a singular observation. No, it isn't. You can't just go all the way outside the solar system and watch the planets sped up going around the sun. It's an inference based on countless observations, like the positions and motions of planets and other celestial objects, stellar parallax, and other threads of evidence. Heliocentrism correlates a wide variety of data and explains them neatly with a singular model. That's what a theory is. Other facts he regularly cites also do not check. Water is H2O. That's an observation, so it's an absolute fact. Well, how do we know this? How do we know the molecular formula? How do we even know that atoms exist? Atomic theory. You can't observe an individual water molecule. There's another problem here. Sabor regularly says that observations are facts, so to him, an observation can be considered factual. Well, we observe Darwinian evolution every single day, so it factually occurs by his own standard. Random mutations in bacterial colonies leading to entire strains with antibiotic resistance is an example of evolution by natural selection. We observe this repeatedly, so it's a fact. We also observe speciation. We have observed the emergence of new species of microorganisms, plants, and animals. Speciation is evolution. Evolution is therefore a fact. Now, Sabor will probably claim that's not what he means by Darwinian evolution. In fact, he's clearly already obfuscating and trying to talk about more modern paradigms. He's going to say he meant common ancestry, tree of life, all the stuff that Noble talks about. In addition, that's what he doesn't like. That's fine. We can talk about all these other things. We can talk about Noble. We can talk about all these other mechanisms that you don't actually understand. But first, concede the debate. Darwinian evolution factually occurs, and men never do a debate with this dumb fuck title ever again. This is the title of the debate that you chose. If you want to talk about something else, concede the debate, and then we'll talk about your other topics instead. For now, let's proceed with what I thought the debate was going to be about. So if speciation happens today, it is logical to extrapolate that it has happened in the past to proceed to produce the species that are here, which gives us common ancestry. Sabor especially despises common ancestry of the great apes. He has zero ability to address the field of biological anthropology and just pretends it doesn't exist. There are precisely zero anthropologists who do not accept the fact that humans are apes and that we have recent common ancestry with other apes. This was hypothesized, thus predicting transitional forms, and then dozens of transitional species were found. That's science. The tree of life will never be overturned. It can be revised. Of course, individual clades are reorganized every day, but it will never go away. Common ancestry is factually true. Even if you include, he loves to talk about horizontal gene transfer, endosymbiotic events, all these other things. This is just a revision of details. It's not rewriting everything, right? It doesn't somehow render phylogeny invalid. Of course, he's got all these colorful analogies he usually likes to toss out here, like the tree of life is not well substantiated. It's like having 13 pages of a big old book like War and Peace, so many missing species. This is completely idiotic. He has no idea how many species are missing. We know of millions, and we have whenever we find new ones, they fall into the tree nicely. So it's not really like a book with a plot. It's more like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. How many pieces do we need? Few hundred. If we have 952, can we be confident far beyond reasonable doubt what the puzzle is? If it's a hot air balloon, what are those last few pieces going to change? Not much. Okay. Of course, Sabor needs to fabricate some kind of uncertainty into science he doesn't like, so he does what every other science-denying pseudo-intellectual moron does. He whines about Thomas Kuhn and paradigm shift. Every electric universe crank I've ever seen uses this book to pretend that Einstein is obsolete and being overturned. Every paradigm is replaced. All of science is constantly shifting. Everything we know is wrong at all times. So the biggest paradigm shift in the history of science, and the one he always cites, is modern physics, or the shift from classical Newtonian mechanics to quantum mechanics and relativity. Even in this extreme example, the existing paradigm is not discarded. It works just fine, and we continue to use it to this day. It is not wrong. It just got limited to the motion of objects larger than an atom that go nowhere near the speed of light. For example, Newton's law of universal gravitation, this law still works just fine. To apply Sabor's attitude, will we shift away from Einstein's paradigm too? Is it a fact that space-time warps around massive objects or not? If we get a theory of everything, will this fact cease to be true? If not, then why pretend the previous paradigm is worthless? It isn't. Look at how atomic theory has evolved over time. With each discovery, everything about the previous model continued to be true. We just got additional layers of detail and precision. Never did new information reveal that atoms don't exist. So the same goes for evolution. Discovering new mechanisms does not mean that the old ones don't exist. The core principles put forward by Darwin of descent with modification and natural selection are objectively true and continue to be true. They just aren't the whole picture. Biologists today all acknowledge the validity of Darwin's work as the forefather of evolutionary biology, but none of them are Darwinists. We're past that, and all of the mechanisms he wants to bring up from Noble and whatever he wants to talk about, none of that invalidates Darwinian evolution, which is the title of the debate. So again, concede this, then we'll talk about whatever you want. So it's pretty much we're saying what could possibly overturn something like atomic theory? You'd have to put forward something that explains every single experiment in the history of chemistry. Same with evolution. We observe it every day. It's the cornerstone of biology. The details are refined, not the full picture. Of course, Sabor has his list of reasons that evolution in particular is no good. He's always talking about probabilistic frameworks and assumptions and disputes. Evolutionary biology is not any more probabilistic than any other science. That doesn't mean anything. It does not apply the scientific method any differently than chemistry or physics. Sabor loves to toss around the terms homology and homoplasy to pretend that evolutionary biologists just make up whatever they want. This is idiotic. These are homologous structures. We know they are homologous because they are made from the same parts: radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges. They are just molded to different shapes, something easily explainable by evolution. Slow morphological change on consistent structural features to yield totally different purposes. That's not how design works. We don't build planes out of boat parts, and yet nature sometimes makes legs and fins and wings out of the same parts because it can't scrap everything and start from scratch. It is not sentient. Homoplasy, on the other hand, describes analogous features. They have superficial similarity, like the same function, but do not indicate recent common ancestry. We can tell because they actually are very different. That the eye evolved many times is not hard to swallow. Even in extant life, we see a variety of complexities for vision. All you need is a photoreceptor selectively expressed on certain cells. Now the organism can sense light. Over time, features evolve that improve this function, like a lens, cornea, etc. This is all sequential and piecemeal. Unlike the caricature that Sabor paints, we don't just assume that everything with structural or functional similarity is immediately related. For example, swimming fast is important to aquatic animals, so they tend to adopt similar shapes, those which are conducive to swimming fast, namely this torpedo shape. Same environment, same selective pressures, so we can expect similar phenotypes, even though they aren't closely related. In contrast, something like pharyngeal gill slits support common ancestry because they are remnants of embryonic development in ancestral forms. They do not become gills. They follow some other pathway due to specific mutations that alter the progress of embryonic development at a particular time. Homology is not an assumption. It is a deductive inference based on empirical evidence of shared ancestry. If we're so hopeless when it comes to determining which structural features are due to common ancestry and which are not, then why are we not even remotely confused when we assign things like this? Why is it so easy to conclude that pterodactyls and parrots are not as closely related as pterodactyls and non-flying dinosaurs? Some homologies are difficult to interpret, others aren't. That's just science. We should note that Sabor regularly admits that he has no issue with whales evolving from land mammals or other examples of extremely significant evolutionary change, which is good since we have countless fossils that represent lineages from fish to tetrapods, land mammals to ocean mammals, dinosaurs to birds, and all the rest. Transitional hominid species embody the exact same principles as all these other lineages. If land mammals can evolve into whales and dolphins, then this small amount of variation in the common ancestry of the great apes is absolutely trivial and is better substantiated than almost any other lineage, given the thousands of specimens we have over dozens of species and multiple genera. He has no ability to dispute any of this. He just shouts circular reasoning and other bullshit as though that is a valid refutation of entire fields of science. There is no circular reasoning. We generate hypotheses and test them. Finding all of these hominin specimens that were predicted is a vindication of the model. Sabor also just regurgitates crap he learned in Philosophy of Science 101 as though it makes him sound intelligent. Evolution bad because swan can be black. He loves his black swan example and the scatter plot and these kinds of things. Once again, science produces exclusively a posteriori knowledge, which is based on observation. All of science is inductive. He rages against this science in particular because it contradicts his baseless faith. Furthermore, placing deduction on a pedestal above induction is silly. Deductive reasoning applied to real-world concepts also relies on induction. Premises are based on observations, which are inductive inferences. Take the famous Aristotelian syllogism, how do we know that all men are mortal? Observation, induction. Lastly, just like any other intelligent design propagandist, Sabor pretends there is so much controversy and debate within the scientific community. There isn't. And as predicted, he points to figures like Dennis Noble to pretend this much. And I'm sorry, Sabor, he is a joke. And you know so little about him that you don't even know that he's not an evolutionary biologist. He's a physiologist. He's not an evolutionary biologist. He's funded by the Templeton Foundation to spread this kind of propaganda, to give some creationists something to talk about. That 2016 meeting you're talking about was funded by the Templeton Foundation. Nobody in evolutionary biology gives two shits about this guy. I'm very sorry to tell you. So to conclude, is Darwinian evolution a fact? Well, is it a fact that the Earth goes around the sun, even though this fact is derived from heliocentric theory? If yes, then facts can be derived from theories, and Darwinian evolution is a fact. If no, then you're going to be hard-pressed to come up with a single thing that qualifies as a scientific fact. To put it another way, if this theory yields this fact, but you pretend other theories are incapable of producing facts, you are cherry-picking the science that you don't like. If this is not a fact, then there are no scientific facts, and the entire debate is pointless, an exercise in preaching to your brainwashed flock. And thus, we close with an ultimatum for Sabor, which must be fulfilled by the end of the debate. Since this was a debate about Darwinian evolution, take the position that no a posteriori knowledge is certain, so we can never be certain about anything in the universe, which makes the debate meaningless as you are singling out evolutionary biology due to an ideological agenda. Or two, admit that your definition of fact includes a posteriori knowledge like heliocentrism, which is derived from a theoretical framework, and that you simply fail to demonstrate how evolutionary biology is any less certain than other examples of well-established theories. Your choice, either is fine with me.
Okay, thanks, Dave. That concludes his opening remarks. Excuse me. We'll then be moving into the rebuttal section of the debate. So each speaker will have 10 minutes to respond to what the previous speaker has said. I just want to remind our speakers that it's perfectly fine to critique the ideas of the opposition and to also question their credentials and things like that. But please keep your criticisms focused on the topic of the debate and relevant to the issue. So with that being said, Sabor will now have 10 minutes of rebuttal. Do you want your slides?
Yes,
Yeah,
I've amended the slides according to some of the things that Farina is claiming. Can I start now?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. So one of the first claims that he actually makes is that no one uses the term Darwinism. Here we have Richard Dawkins in A Devil's Chaplain, basically saying Darwin may be triumphant at the end of the 20th century, but we must acknowledge the possibility that new facts may come to light, which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition. What he also ignored was this particular term again turning up when Dennis Noble's book, Dance to the Tune of Life, he refers to the modern synthesis version of Darwinism. So again, it is a term being used. Now, there's something really interesting that he does. He doesn't give us the present that we were talking about. He doesn't give us the present about why is Dennis Noble a clown? Why is Dennis Noble wrong? He doesn't give us any of those presents. What he does do is he gives us three fallacies. So thank you for that, Farina. Like a good student, you were listening to my talks, but you misrepresented me in many different places. However, I want to concentrate on three particular fallacies. The first is the equivocation fallacy. The equivocation fallacy, let me just give you an example. There's somebody falling down on the floor saying, I have a heart attack. Can you call a doctor? And then someone comes and says, yes, I'm a doctor, but they have a PhD in gender studies. that is the fallacy of equivocation. The word doctor is being used in two different ways. So that is highly misleading. You said Darwinian evolution is a fact, and you defined it as what? You defined it as random mutations and natural selection. Well, guess what? That Darwinian evolution is accepted by me. That Darwinian evolution is accepted by Dennis Noble. That Darwinian evolution is accepted by everyone, and it's trivial. Remember, there's two different ways that you're using the word Darwinian evolution. When I referred to Darwinian evolution, I referred to the idea that random mutations plus natural selection can generate mind and body. That's the definition of Darwinism that I'm using. That's the definition of neo-Darwinism I'm using. What you're doing is you're acknowledging there is natural selection and random mutations, something nobody denies. So that is actually the fallacy of equivocation. Another thing, and I want to go to something quite funny because I knew this was going to happen. Let me go to my, oops, where's it gone? Okay, so yep, you can see it there. This is my email going back to you. I don't want you to gish gallop and conflate two different ideas. To be clear, my original two debates were, is Darwinian evolution a fact? Is intelligent design science? Is universal common ancestry true? The reason I did this is because I don't want Darwinian evolution and universal common ancestry mixed up. Like I said, blah, blah, blah. So I knew you were going to do this. And guess what this is? This is, again, the equivocation fallacy, because if common ancestry is accepted to be true, it doesn't mean Darwinian evolution is true. John Baptiste Lamarck, he believed in the tree of life. He believed in common ancestry. Did he believe in Darwinian evolution? No, he didn't. So that is the equivocation fallacy. It is also the non sequitur fallacy. Can you give any shred of evidence that common ancestry is a necessary and sufficient condition for Darwinian evolution? You cannot. And I very much doubt you've even thought about it this way. This is why I covered myself and I sent that email, because I knew you were going to gish gallop. Most of your presentation had nothing to do with what I said. Most of your presentation, you took the horn of cowardice. Now, you said Dennis Noble is a joke alongside, he's a joke alongside Shapiro and others. Okay, so I want to ask you a question. How is it that you have Cambridge University publishing his book? How do you have it that Oxford University is publishing his book? How do you have it that Nature is publishing his work? The Royal Society is publishing his work. Now, I want to say something about James Shapiro's book, Evolution, A View from the 21st Century. This is called by Carl Woese, the man who discovered archaea, the third domain of life. It is called a game changer. If these people are if they're jokes, then why would mainstream publishers print their work? Why would they be taken seriously? Why would they be professors of universities? Why would they have peer-reviewed papers? Why would any of this happen? What you are basically doing is you are denying academia. You are denying science. You're denying the ability of these academics to actually thrive by attacking them without any justification. I asked you very clearly, why is Dennis Noble a clown? You repeated he's a clown. You repeated he's a joke, but you didn't give a shred of evidence. In your 3-hour-long video, you didn't give a shred of evidence of that either. The other fallacy that you fell into is the red herring fallacy. Lots of things that you brought up in your discussion were misrepresentations of my position, but you didn't even take a moment to actually show how they're linked to the actual debate today. Okay, so I did actually offer you a debate on universal common ancestry, and that's still available to you. So the things that you've mentioned about homology and speciation, we can actually discuss then. You mentioned probabilistic framework, you mentioned assumptions. Those things can be done in that debate if you're willing to accept it, so that it's entirely up to you. Now, something else that you actually mentioned is this. You mentioned the idea that Darwinian evolution, something you have to repeat yourself because you weren't being too clear. Something about me raising the flag if I accept Darwinian evolution. That is a total straw man. No one denies the idea that randomness exists. No one denies the idea that natural selection actually exists. You should read Dennis Noble's book. You should actually read my book, The Death of Neo-Darwinism, because in the same book, I actually accept that natural selection does exist. And I also accept that Darwinian evolution from a background process point of view does actually exist, but it does not create us body and mind. It does not explain biodiversity. It doesn't do any of those things. It's a trivial process which is observed in nature. Now, I want to go to some other things which I think are important. I've already dealt with the rest of your nonsense. So Darwinian evolution as a term is obviously being used. That's something you can't deny. The Gish galloping we did. You said Dennis Noble is not an evolutionary biologist. You are assuming only people with a genetics background or people working in molecular biology are evolutionists. Why is his field of physiology, why is his field not considered evolution? In fact, you will find papers published like this, The Physiology of Evolution. In fact, Dennis Noble's entire argument is that physiology guides evolution. Now, I want to take you back to something else, which I think is really important. If we go back to these particular points, Dennis Noble's entire argument is that physiology guides evolution. Epigenetics guides evolution. Epigenetic markings are genetically assimilated. So for you to simply say he's not an evolutionary biologist, what you're simply doing is denying his argument. And let's go back to something that you don't want to speak about, which is this. Your mistakes, you just brushed over them. Oh, I just said something. No, you made total nonsensical statements. You need to take those back. You need to say, I didn't know what I was talking about when I was saying these particular things. And you need to make it unequivocal. Okay, something else which I think is quite important. Remember what I said. You are in a state of a dilemma. You can either attack Dennis Noble, or you can be incompetent and try and challenge him and you're not going to succeed, or you can be a coward and try and avoid it. Now, what you simply said is he's a joke and he's not an evolutionary biologist. Can you give me any evidence for that? Can you give me any reasoning for that? Can you give me any justification for that? Because what you seem to do is you seem to attack academics, but you don't justify your positions. And do you know what? I'm really going to enjoy the 30 minutes. We're going to go back and forth because I'm going to hold you to account for this. And I'll tell you something which I think is really interesting. Can you explain his perspective on Aristotle's distinctions and the nature of causality? I bet you can't. And I bet something else as well. I bet your way of dealing with this issue is the same way that you dealt with your discussion with Jonathan McClatchy on Twitter, which is all on this website. You can find it on evolutionnews.org, where you were misrepresenting Michael Behe and you were distorting what he was saying. And when you were caught out, here's what you said to him. Get ready for the top search result for your name on both Google and YouTube being me taking a big steamy dump all over your dumb science denying apologist face. Is that the behavior of a professor?
1 minute.
Is that the way that a professor talks, or is that the way that a Pajit talks? So the fact is this, Farina, you have been found to be neutered. You've been found to be domesticated under the environmental pressure of a debate, and you have been found to be deselected.
Okay, we now have 10 minutes of response from Dave. Did you have any slides to present with this, Dave?
No, I'm just going to address this bullshit he's spewing. Okay, so I find this really hilarious. You're whining about my presentation having nothing to do with what you said. That's because you didn't talk about the topic. You're so fucking stupid that you don't even know how to do a debate based on the topic that you chose. You said Darwinian evolution. Everything you're saying is wrong. You don't understand the definitions of these words. You just said that I said that Darwinian evolution is random mutations and natural selection. I didn't say that, so you either weren't listening or I don't know what's going on over there. Darwin didn't know about mutations. Darwinism precedes the entire field of genetics. Even when neo-Darwinism came about, it still was about Mendelian genetics. So we still didn't know about DNA. So all these other mechanisms you want to allude to has nothing to do with Darwinian evolution. So like I said, look, we can talk about any of these other things you want, but this was the debate title that you chose. So, and it's also why you went first, because that way you could talk about whatever you wanted and pretend that I'm off topic. I'm the one talking about the topic that you chose. Darwinian evolution is descent with modification and natural selection. That factually happens. So whatever vernacular you want to use, it's a fact. So you can admit that evolution by natural selection factually occurs. You lose this debate. Then I'll gladly talk about whatever else you want. Common ancestry, we're going to talk about all these things. It's totally fine. But you have to admit that Darwinian evolution factually occurs, right? You can't just distort the definitions of all these concepts here. Darwin precedes genetics. He had no idea what mutations are, no random mutations, any of this stuff. So just stop. This is getting ridiculous. The second thing we're going to talk about is, as I predicted, you have no ability to discuss science. All you do is Daddy Dennis Noble said this other guy said that. Stop whining about what people say and talk about the science. We're going to talk about all of these mechanisms. We're going to talk about the biology. We're not going to go, this guy did this. And by the way, Dennis Noble, something in Oxford University Press, whatever. That's not Oxford University. It's a publisher, right? Anybody can publish books. That doesn't mean everything in it is perfect. And it doesn't mean that all of the Oxford faculty is like, yay, go Dennis. All right. And no, I'm sorry. He's not an evolutionary biologist. Okay. He's a physiologist. Nobody in the field takes him seriously. And same, I'm sorry, you're bringing up Behe and McClatchy. Like, how dumb do you want to make yourself look by association? You're bringing up Discovery Institute cranks. Yes, I said what I said on Twitter because he was being an idiot. What do you want to do about it? It's fine. All right. And I've debunked all of those clowns to high heaven. So talking about Noble, right? So we look, it's common knowledge among evolutionary biologists that Noble completely misunderstands key concepts in evolutionary biology. Anytime he's talking about the gene-centric view, anytime he's talking about the central dogma, right? This idea that something is contradicting the central dogma. No, it isn't, right? The central dogma, all it says is that the information is going from DNA to mRNA to tRNA and therefore proteins, and that it can't go the other direction in that particular lineage there. Do you know why? Because amino acid residues, right? There are multiple codons that code for the same amino acid residue. And so if you have one amino acid residue, you don't know what codon it came from. You can't go from an amino acid chain, that information, you can't tell what genome it came from. That's all the central dogma is talking about. I don't know why Crick called it a dogma. It's not a dogma. I think he just didn't know what the word dogma means, but that's what the central dogma is. So anytime people bring up like reverse transcriptase or these other things, these other mechanisms, it's not contradicting the central dogma. So we can definitely talk about the things that Noble says, right? We can talk about all these things. By the way, there's so many, he's just also constantly constructing strawman arguments against neo-Darwinism. He attacks positions they don't hold, right? There was a rant about Jerry Coyne where he just fabricated a thing that Jerry Coyne says. Yeah, there's plenty of critiques, right? I'm not going to do what you do. I'm not going to go, this guy said this guy said that. But if you want to go there, there are plenty of critiques of Dennis Noble exposing how he doesn't actually know what he's talking about with these regards. Anything bringing up neo-Lamarckism is just completely misled, right? And Lamarckism is about giraffes getting the longer neck to get the fruit, and then that is somehow passed down immediately to offspring, right? That's not there. None of these mechanisms that are meant to represent neo-Lamarckism are actually Lamarckism. What else do we want to? Oh, you mentioned this thing. This is really want to get into. This is why I want to talk about science, because anytime you actually try to talk about science, you sound so stupid. It's unbelievable. You were talking about membranes and not being coded in the genome. Well, how the hell are those molecules synthesized? Right? You want to talk about lipids in the membrane? Where do those come from, Sabor? Those come from enzymes. Enzymes build them. And how do you get enzymes? They're coded for in the genome. See, so we're going to talk about molecular biology. Anything you want to talk about Noble, don't go, he said this was published in that. Talk to me about science. We're going to talk about science. We're going to put away our heroes and our daddies and all that. We're going to get into these actual mechanisms, right? We're going to talk about science. Talk to me about molecules and cells, transcription, translation, mutations. We're going to talk about that. Anytime you stray from that, I'm going to bring you back. We're going to be talking about science here, right? You wanted to take me into the deep waters, right? Sabor wants to take me to the deep waters. So let's go there. So really, I had a couple other points here. What did I say? You said Lamarck about common ancestry. Lamarck did not accept common ancestry. He thought life was constantly spontaneously appearing. So they all had different forms and separate ancestry. What else did I have? Some other notes here. Yeah, more about Noble. He proposes mechanisms where an organism self-directs its own evolution in response to environmental conditions or stimuli. That's not the case. But in general, yeah, let's see. Yeah, that's about all I had. So yeah, we can go anywhere you want here. But the first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to admit that the title of the debate is stupid. Maybe never use this title ever again. Darwinian evolution, the title that you chose, descent with modification and natural selection, factually occurs. So you're going to concede that that's a fact, right? That's where we start. Once you concede that, we can go into any of these other areas you want to talk about, and we're going to do so by talking about science. We're not going to say Dennis Noble said that, Elliot Sober said that, this guy said that. We're going to talk about science, okay? Because all you ever do is misquote people, and I can't fact check immediately in real time how you're misquoting people. So we're going to talk about science. If you bring someone up, I'm going to say, what are they talking about? Explain it to me. Explain it to me in scientific terms, okay? So that's the name of the game. Let's go for it.
You still have 3 minutes left. Are you happy to say the rest of your time?
I don't have anything else to say.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. Let me just stop the clock there. Okay, so we're now going to move into 30 minutes of moderated discussion. Just want to remind both of our speakers, I'll bring them back here to stay on topic and try to be civil, please. I know it's been a little bit heated and it's fine to disagree, but what I want to do to start us off is try to get a bit of clarity on the topic, because there's obviously been some disagreement as to exactly how to understand Darwinian evolution. And I wrote down a couple of points here, and I'd like you both to respond to this. So Sabur said that he defines Darwinian evolution as random mutation plus natural selection can generate mind and body. Whereas Dave described Darwinian evolution as descent with modification plus natural selection. So what appears to be at the core of the disagreement here from Sabur is this idea that Darwinian evolution claims that these mechanisms of random mutation and selection can generate mind and body. So Sabur, I was wondering if you could maybe clarify for us what you mean by that, and then Dave can respond and we can go from there.
Well, I mean, if we are to accept what Dave is saying, then why would such a debate like Dawkins versus Noble take place? Why would the Genetic Book of the Dead, which has an entire chapter dedicated to Noble, why would that take place? Why would Understanding Living Systems, the book, be published by Ray Noble and Dennis Noble a year later? Clearly these discussions are happening and he's not aware of what's going on, so he's just trying to his best attempt is to try and make a fallacy of equivocation. That's what he's basically doing. Now, if he read my book, which he had plenty of time to do because that book came out months ago, in that book, I make it very clear. Natural selection takes place, random mutations take place. This is the same thing that Dennis Noble says. No one denies this. In fact, this is something that was known way before any of these discussions took place. So what we are really speaking about is, does natural selection plus random mutations, can it create mind and body as the selfish gene purports it can? That is what we need to discuss. Not does Darwinian evolution take place, natural selection with random mutations. Everybody agrees with that. Dennis Noble agrees with that. I have agreed with that. If you actually saw my talks, you would hear me saying that exact thing. So I'm very surprised that your best attempt is to try and make a straw man of my argument and rely on the fallacy of equivocation.
It's not a straw man. That's the title you chose, right? If you're admitting that Darwinian evolution occurs, that it factually occurs, then why did you name the debate "Is Darwinian evolution a fact?" This is the title that you chose, buddy. And as I predicted, you're just going, Dennis Noble, this guy, this book, right? What do you mean creating mind and body? Darwinian evolution creating mind and body. What are you even talking about?
What I'm talking about is Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. You ever heard of that? That's the main claim of the book.
Stop listing books and people. Talk to me about science, buddy. Talk to me about science.
Okay, so is Richard Dawkins a scientist?
Yeah, he's a scientist. So if you want to paraphrase him, you can paraphrase him if you want.
No, I'm not paraphrasing him. I'm telling you exactly what he says. He says genes created as mind and body.
Gene created as mind and body? What?
Do you have a comprehension issue? What I said is genes created us mind and body.
Okay, so gene expression yields to an organism.
Be honest with you.
What are you saying?
Look, let me tell you something very clearly. James, the environmental pressure of being in a debate has led him to have some comprehension issues. So I think if you slow things down a little bit,
I think you're stalling.
No, I think if you slow it down a little bit,
you're stalling
piece by piece, because what you don't seem to understand is James asked me a question which he seems to understand, but you don't understand. James, do you understand what I mean when I say Darwinian evolution and why it's different to what he's saying?
Well, it's not for me to get into the debate, but maybe if we can, Sabur, you can explain for us what you mean by generated mind and body, and then Dave can talk about why he thinks that's wrong.
That's perfectly fine. So the idea, and again, I'm going to go back to Noble, and I know Noble is kryptonite for you because you called him a clown. You contradict his.
He is a clown.
Book. You contradicted his book multiple times, and you've been caught wanting. You don't actually have the evidence against him. You don't even understand what he said. In fact, I'm just going to ask you a very simple question.
Sure.
I'm going to define.
You're already changing the subject, though. By the way, you're already changing the subject.
Dave, can you let him finish?
I'm going to explain this. Okay. So let me explain this to you in very simple terms. Aristotle made distinctions about causality. I know you're nodding your head because it's too much for you, but let me just explain.
No, you're just like, we're talking about science and you're jumping to philosophy because you can't talk about science. You can't do it.
Philosophy and science are tied at the hip. Okay. So this is Dennis Noble's argument, and this is why he challenges the selfish gene idea, the idea that genes create his mind and body. What he basically says is, look, Aristotle said, imagine a table. I am the efficient cause of the table as the carpenter. The table itself is made of wood, so wood is the material cause. The form of the table is the formal cause, and me relying on the table to put my laptop to refute you, that is the final cause. So you have 4 different types of causes. Now, what Dennis Noble is saying is genes are causes from a form perspective. They are templates, or in James Shapiro's terminology, they are not read-only files, they read-rewrite files. And according to Richard Dawkins, and anyone can go back and watch the debate, according to Richard Dawkins, his view is that genes are causal. Genes created us mind and body. And I'm going to paraphrase what he's saying. Anyone can fact check me here, that the replicator distinction alongside the vehicle distinction, it is that the replicator controls the vehicle like with a remote control. And in fact, the very ultimate rationale of life is the preservation of genes. This is the selfish gene idea. This is standard. I'm so surprised you don't understand this.
You're saying literally nothing. You're doing analogy after analogy after analogy, something about tables. What are you saying? So are you saying that gene expression generates an organism? Can we just say that? What are you saying?
I never used the word gene expression. That's epigenetics, by the way.
No.
By the way,
gene expression is epigenetics. Every time you try to talk about science, you get this gem of stupidity, like gene expression is epigenetics.
One at a time, gentlemen.
What the hell does that mean?
Epigenetics leads to gene expression, doesn't it?
Epigenetics modifies gene expression.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay, now
no, what do you mean thank you? What do you mean thank you? What you said was insanely stupid. Gene expression is epigenetics, is what you said.
Let's go back to James's point about causality. I said genes created as mind and body is the idea. Why don't you challenge it?
Because it doesn't mean anything. What are you talking about? I'm trying to talk about science. You're saying something cryptic. Gene expression creates mind and body. Okay, are we saying that gene expression as an embryo generates the form of an organism? Is that it? Let's talk about science, buddy.
Okay, shall I put it in totally different words? Because you didn't understand Aristotle's point that I was trying to make.
You didn't say anything. You use stories and analogies because you can't talk about science. When you try to talk about science, you say something idiotic like gene expression is epigenetics. You don't even know what these words mean.
It's linked to epigenetics. Of course it is. Now, let me just go back to a very simple point, and you tell me where this doesn't make any sense to you. The standard idea of the modern synthesis, which in 1976 was really popularized by the Selfish Gene book. Now it goes back to between the 1920s to 50s. You thought it was the 1990s, which itself.
I said that off the cuff, if I even did say that, off the cuff in a reaction video. It's not like I did a piece on it. You're referencing the reaction video where I made fun of you and your friend.
Move past this specific point and focus on.
Okay, were you wrong about that?
I don't even think I said it, but if I did, yeah, I was earlier than the 1990s. So what? It was a reaction video. Who cares?
When was it? Okay, so the reaction video doesn't have to be factually correct. I'm glad.
It's a reaction video. It was 3 hours long. See, you're fixating on which decade did this come about, which decade, right? Who this guy said this, because you can't talk about science. Talk to me about gene expression. Talk to me about genes. Talk to me about any kind of science. You can't do it. You're switching the subject every 5 seconds because you can't do it.
All I'm speaking about is causality. So let me just go back to this idea very clearly. The blind watchmaker, are you aware of this idea? Are you aware of the idea that random mutations plus natural selection is the cause of biodiversity? You aware of this idea?
Primarily, yeah. That's a very large part of biodiversity, yes.
Okay, good, good. Dennis Noble is arguing it is at least a one-eyed watchmaker, not a blind watchmaker. Okay.
Ooh,
So
very cryptic.
It's not very cryptic, actually, because what he's basically saying is physiology guides evolution. That's his claim.
How? Specifically,
so-
mechanistically, specifically,
beautiful.
mechanistically.
Beautiful. I'm just going to share my slides again and go over this slowly because you have a comprehension issue.
No, because you can't actually tell me. And
No,
won't be able to understand what that says either.
So let's go over it very
Are
slowly.
we going to slides on open discussion? I thought this was just a back and forth here.
Because I need to educate you, so we'll need to go to the slides.
Yeah, I'm sure you can educate
If
me
there's no
about
specific
science.
thing you
don't
want to
understand.
show us, Sabor, I think that's all right. But yeah, it's not a presentation mode.
No, sorry, it's not presentation mode. Let me just go back to some basic things here. So genetic assimilation. Are you familiar with Conrad Waddington's work?
Go ahead and enlighten me, buddy.
Aha. So, okay. So let me do this first, right? And James, you can stop me if you think I'm going the wrong way. I'm happy to explain genetic assimilation and Conrad Waddington's work, but I don't want to give Farina free education. And I'm going to make a claim. He has no idea what Conrad Waddington was up to and why Dennis Noble uses his work. Why don't you explain to me first what this is? And if you fail to do so, then I'll do it.
Okay, so epigenetics, we're talking about modifications to the genome that alter the when genes can be expressed. So DNA methylation and stuff like that. There is some pretty decent evidence for a little bit of inheritance of this over a generation or two. So mainly histone modification, right? If a histone is coordinated to a gene, then it can't be expressed. And if it's not, then it can be expressed. So there are environmental influences that can determine whether the gene can be transcribed at any given time. And it's actually pretty cool. Over the past couple of decades, we figured out that there is some element of inheritance here, maybe a generation or two, but that's it. You have no evidence that this is the same as like random mutations being inherited. So have fun trying to talk about this.
Okay, you didn't mention genetic assimilation.
Okay, tell me what specific phrase you're trying to talk about. I told you what transgenerational. You have a slide up that says transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, and you said, "Tell me about this." And I fucking told you what transgenerational epigenetic inheritance is.
I asked you.
So
about
what are you looking for?
I asked you about genetic assimilation.
Okay, so tell me assimilation. Tell me a thing that you are dying to tell me.
I'm not going to educate you till I prove to the.
Well, I just educated you on what epigenetics is because you don't know that.
No, you answered a question I didn't ask. I asked you about genetic assimilation. Genetic assimilation is linked to epigenetics. It's not the same thing.
So say a thing that you're trying to say, and then
I've caught you now.
No,
and
okay.
I'm going to take you to the cleaners. So why don't you tell me?
You said that gene expression is epigenetics. You said something so unbelievably stupid, and now you're trying to do a gotcha on me. It's pathetic. Explain science, and we'll talk about science.
Slow down.
Calm down, buddy. I see you're getting worked up. Let's just talk about some science.
Please explain genetic assimilation.
What are you doing? If you want to talk about something, talk about.
Yeah, so if you have a point that you want to make
the fucking point, dude.
Otherwise, we'll move on.
Okay, so the point I'm going to make, and I'm going to give Farina one more chance. Conrad Waddington's work on genetic assimilation is absolutely pivotal to Noble's argument. Noble is an Oxford professor, which is something prestigious, something that Farina can never be. Maybe that's why he's attacking.
He's not an evolutionary biologist, though.
He is an evolutionary biologist.
No,
as well.
He isn't. You can Google it.
Biologists in the world.
It's kind of shocking that you didn't know that, actually.
And let me explain something. You said the modern synthesis came together in the 70 years after 1920, so that's 1990. Conrad Waddington, his book Strategy of the Genes was published in 1957. And he worked on fruit flies, okay? And what he basically did is he applied different things to them. Heat, shock, electric things, whatever. And the idea was to get an epigenetic response and to see if that epigenetic response could be transferred to the germline. And what he found in his studies was after 14 generations, you get genetic assimilation. Since then, a lot more work has been done in this field. And what it basically goes to show is you're attacking Dennis Noble, although you have no idea why he does what he does and who he's referring to.
No, I know, because the Templeton Foundation pays him to do it. That's why he does it.
Okay, so
Also, you didn't explain anything. What epigenetic response? What genetic assimilation? What are all these things? Actually say something. You can't do it. You just said this book is published this.
Hang on, one at a time. One at a time.
Okay. So genetic assimilation means when epigenetic marking is transferred to the germline after 14 generations, in the case of the fruit flies with Conrad Waddington's book.
So how is that a challenge to Darwinian evolution?
There we go. So you have no idea what genetic assimilation is, yet you're so happy to call Dennis Noble a clown.
Yeah, because he is. What's the problem? You're naming some other study. What does it have to do with anything?
So give us some evidence why he's a clown.
How does I just told you all of the misquotes, and he's like, how is epigenetics in any way a challenge to Darwinian evolution? It's not. It's part of the modern synthesis. We know about it. You're talking about this like it's some revolution that negates the Darwinian paradigm. It's not.
Okay, so again, you've completely strawmanned my argument. Let me just go back.
You don't have an argument. You just say Daddy Dennis. Daddy Dennis said something, and I don't know what it is. But
let me just show you. Let me show you exactly.
No, we're not doing slides, Sabor.
No, I'm just showing you one slide because you misrepresented my position.
No,
it's only one slide.
Oh, okay, only one slide because I don't have anything to say.
No, it's not that. Can you see the slides now? Can you guys see the slides? Can you share it, James?
Hang on. Yep.
Okay, so this just goes to show you that you didn't actually understand my point. Let me go back and show you the exact slide, what it says. This is the slide I had in my opening. Epigenetics leading to genetic assimilation, and one of the causes of that is extracellular vesicles. Now, genetic assimilation is the final point which Dennis Noble uses to show that physiology guides evolution. That is the argument that he actually makes. And in fact, he's published a paper on physiology guiding evolution and also the physiology of evolution. So I'm not sure why you keep saying he's not an evolutionary biologist.
Which one's not? Dennis Noble? Because he's not. I don't what are you not understanding about that?
I think the basic issue here is you have confused an assertion for an argument. You just keep stating it, but you don't give a shred of evidence why he's not a biologist.
You're not even shred it because he's not, right? If someone's not an astronaut, do I have to provide evidence that they're not what are you talking about?
Can we try this from a different angle, a totally different angle? Okay, totally different angle.
Okay.
Are you aware of the distinction between reductive biology and integrative biology or holistic biology? Are you aware of the distinction between the two?
I am not aware of these terms that you're using. No, go ahead.
Okay. So reductive biology is this idea that you break everything down to the genetic level and you go up. Okay, that's the standard gene-centric perspective. Dennis Noble, Ray Noble, James Shapiro, Scott Turner, all of these people from the third way, they believe in the holistic perspective. They believe that you simply don't break everything down to the genetic level. You can actually have a holistic understanding in which there is no privileged level of causality. Okay, so you cannot say genes are working at a privileged level. Now, Sidney Brenner, and he's
what is a privileged level? What does that mean? Don't lecture me. We're talking here.
No, I'm educating you. So
you're not educating me.
No. Let me explain, because you don't understand. You don't have anything to say. So I'll explain.
I have plenty to say, right? You're pretending that genetic assimilation is not Darwinian. It is Darwinian, right? The environment exposes existing genetic variation. Natural selection acts on the variation.
I'm going to keep teaching you and domesticate you. Just don't worry about it.
Okay, don't respond to what I said. Genetic assimilation is Darwinian. I'm sorry.
Levels of abstraction, okay? According to Sidney Brenner, the level of abstraction should be the cell, not the genome. According to Richard Dawkins and the selfish gene idea, you break everything down to the idea of replicators, self-replicators, genes. The idea of Dennis Noble and others is that is not the correct way of looking at biology. So there's an ontological shift from reductive biology to ontology, which involves holism or integrative biology. So that's what these guys are doing.
Yeah, and in the modern synthesis, we include epigenetics and niche construction and all of these other mechanisms. So I don't see why you're pretending that any of this contradicts modern evolutionary biology. You're also not understanding the genetic assimilation.
I never said that. I never said that. When did I say anything is contradicting?
So what the hell is this debate even about? All you're doing is saying here are some neat things in biology, or are you pretending that you're contradicting some kind of fundamental paradigm?
Let me explain again. Maybe James can help us out here. We're speaking about neo-Darwinism, genes creating us mind and body. That idea I'm challenging. Do you understand that?
No, because it does, right? For physiology to guide evolution, it would have to change the DNA.
What? Say that again?
For physiology to guide evolution, it would have to change the DNA. In embryonic development, it's the genes that are determining the form. You're talking about mind and body, right? It's forming the organism, right?
Okay. Have you heard of somatic hypermutation?
What about it?
No. Firstly, have you heard of it?
Yes, I've heard of it. I don't recall the exact definition.
Can you explain it to me before I explain it to you and educate you for free again?
Buddy, you said that gene expression is epigenetics. All right. Do you want me to quiz you? I'll quiz you too, right? Tell me about gene expression. Explain to me mechanistically how gene expression works. You take a quiz.
Hypermutation. Shall I explain it to you?
If you'd like, if you have a point.
I do have a point. The point is this. In B cells in the immune system, when there is an antigen, the genome is actually mutated, hypermutated in certain parts, and those are the parts that actually code for antibodies. And those DNA sequences are then selected by the organism to fight off antigens. So according to Dennis Noble, somatic hypermutation changes the genome.
Okay, so we're talking about mutation and selection.
No, we're not. You've totally not understood anything.
You just said the words mutation and selection. You're not talking about mutation and selection.
Okay, we are talking about somatic hypermutation, which is not the same as your version of Darwinism, which is trivial, random mutations plus selection. We're speaking
we can talk about DNA. Yeah.
Okay.
Darwin didn't know what DNA is.
Do you deny physiology can guide evolution?
No, I suppose not.
Okay, that's good, because that means you're going against neo-Darwinism, because neo-Darwinism says you cannot have physiology guiding evolution.
Well, neo-Darwinism is not the current paradigm of evolution.
You're right there. And that's going to be a very nice short, by the way.
A very nice short where it's saying absolutely nothing.
No,
you're pretending that I'm defending a paradigm from 100 years ago.
Where you're trying to defend neo-Darwinism, but then you admit physiology.
I'm not. The whole debate, again, Sabor, is Darwinian evolution a fact? That's the title that you chose. Okay. Yes. So I don't know what you keep whining about. What's
the definition I used?
Huh? You said random mutation and natural selection, which is not what it is. So you don't even know what it is. What's the problem?
I never defined Darwinian. I define Darwinian evolution in the context of this debate as genes created as mind and body.
Okay, well, Darwin didn't know what genes are. So I don't know what to tell you about that.
Fallacy of equivocation.
Stop. What are you, a flat earther? You're just listing random fallacies? I'm sorry.
Actually, there's actually 4 fallacies you've committed. 3 formal, 1 informal. Fallacy of equivocation, non sequitur fallacy.
What did I equivocate?
The red herring fallacy and the
gentlemen, I don't know that this is particularly helpful. I might bring up.
Maybe you can help.
Bring back a point. That
maybe
Dave
I need to come back to Australia and debate you instead of this guy.
Sabor, previously, Dave asked you if you think that epigenetics is inconsistent with the theory of a Darwinian evolution, or with Darwinian evolution. So I don't know. So you don't think that?
No, I don't think that. That's a straw man again. I didn't say that.
So how is it this incredible challenge to Darwinism?
So let me explain. Let me explain again. Let me educate you again. Neo-Darwinism is the claim that genes created us mind and body. Physiology can't guide evolution. Epigenetics followed by genetic assimilation. Now, I'm just going to give you an example that anybody can check between Richard Dawkins and Dennis Noble. They're having this argument about the Baldwin effect, or what's known as the genetic assimilation, right? What they basically are speaking about is fruit flies. This is a study that was done in the 1950s, but then afterwards there were more studies that were actually done. After 14 generations, that was actually assimilated into the genome. Now, Skinner's actually done some experiments And he's actually shown you cannot show what is genetic and what is epigenetic and what is assimilated. That's how mixed up it is. So all of this challenges neo-Darwinism. I never said epigenetics challenges neo-Darwinism. It's genetic assimilation that can challenge neo-Darwinism.
What you said was that gene expression is is epigenetics. All right,
No,
I want you to explain to me how.
Wait a second. If I said that, then I was wrong. What I
Okay,
actually
good.
meant was it's linked. What I actually meant was it's linked. I'm ready to accept if I misspoke. You're not
Okay.
ready to accept. You're saying
Mm.
modern Darwinism, modern synthesis came together in 1990, 1920s neo-Darwinism. You cannot use the terms interchangeably. You keep making all of these straw man
Okay.
arguments against the third.
There's
wave
no
evolution.
straw man. What
You're
I would
not
like
ready
you to
to-
explain
you're
is how
wrong.
genetic
So
assimilation
let's let Dave
challenges
respond
Darwinism.
to what you said before.
How does
Dave, go
genetic
ahead.
assimilation challenge Darwinism?
Okay, let me be clear again. Genetic assimilation is challenging neo-Darwinism. And the reason why it's challenging neo-Darwinism is because of the one-way causation. Now, Darwinism itself, the way that you've defined it, is a truism. It's like saying roses are roses. It's trivial. That's the way you've defined Darwinism.
No,
You've
I
defined.
didn't define
what's-
anything. I just know what
what's
it
your-
is.
What's your definition of Darwinism for the context of this debate?
Descent with modification and natural selection. I said it in my opening statement. That's what it is. That's what everybody acknowledges that it
Okay,
is.
you know what? That's trivial. Erasmus Darwin believed
Sure.
in that. Lamarck believed in that. You had people going
No,
back hundreds
no.
of years who
Lamarck had a
believed in-
complete. No. Okay. But
No,
anyway,
Lam-
you're
Lamarck
still not
actually-
admitting
Lamarck
that.
Lamarck believed in common ancestry, and you again misrepresented him. He believed in
No.
common ancestry. Yes,
No,
he
he
did.
believed in new lineages.
No, he believed in multiple origins, but he did
Yeah,
believe in
multiple
common
origins.
ancestry. Yeah, but
Okay,
he believed in
limited
common
common
ancestry.
ancestry, not universal then.
Yeah, I know. Did I say he believed in universal common ancestry? I said common
Okay.
ancestry.
There's so many tangents. I want you to explain
No,
how
it's not a tangent.
genetic
I call you
assimilation
out.
contradicts
call
Darwinian,
you misrepresenting
neo-Darwinian, any paradigm.
Okay. Let me say something about Michael Behe, for example. Right, Michael
Mhm.
Behe is somebody that accepts universal common ancestry. He doesn't really have a problem with it, but he doesn't accept neo-Darwinism, which goes to show neo-Darwinism. To believe in neo-Darwinism, common ancestry is not a necessary or sufficient condition. And you
Well,
didn't answer that point.
Behe is a paid propagandist but with Discovery Institute.
Genetic
Why do we care
fallacy.
what he says?
Genetic fallacy. Why don't you address the
Genetic
point?
fallacy.
I
What
could
point?
learn about Spider-Man by reading I could learn about the Big Bang by reading a Spider-Man comic. It doesn't mean that the Big Bang didn't happen. That's a genetic fallacy. So
Okay,
Michael Behe is
I've-
paid.
I have hours of
Fine.
content debunking Michael Behe. Do we want to turn this debate into
And-
debunking Michael
and you
Behe?
got caught out misrepresenting him.
I didn't get caught misrepresenting. The
Yes, you
DI agents did their damage
You-
control.
Let's
And then-
move on from
And
the Michael
and
Behe
then,
point.
and then what did you do? You acted like a Bajit and you threatened to shit on the guy's face.
I don't know what Pajit is. I don't know what
Yeah,
that
let-
means.
Let's not use that term,
Yeah,
please.
McClatchy's
So,
a clown. What do you want? These are all paid propaganda agents. What
so
am I
Dave,
supposed to do?
So you could,
I
you
wanted
can
you-
threaten to shit
Hang on,
on their faces.
gentlemen, please. Dave, I wanted you to address something that Sabor's been talking about, this idea that Sabor accepts the idea that there is is accepted common ancestry and descent with modification and natural
He accepts
natural
in
selection.
a limited way. He
But-
doesn't accept common history of.
Oh yeah, let me finish, and you can
Mhm.
address the point. But what he says is that these mechanisms aren't sufficient for producing mind and body, and he points to some other mechanisms that he's talked about, which he thinks are also important, like linking to physiology. So I wanted you, Dave, to comment on what you think is inaccurate about what Sabor's been saying.
No, I think that they're obvious.
your
Like I
point of
said right first with Darwin, we identified descent with modification and natural selection. Then we started learning about genetics, and now with the modern synthesis, we have all kinds of other mechanisms. It's a rich tapestry, right? The title of the debate was "Is Darwinian evolution a fact?" We can all agree that it is, except he won't concede that. But that there are plenty of other mechanisms going on. Right? It doesn't change how how an organism comes about, right? From a zygote and gene expression to yield. Okay, body, obviously, mind. I guess we're talking about a brain as well. There's no contradiction there. He's the one that's pretending that these alternate mechanisms somehow completely overturn and have this incredible paradigm shift, going away from traditional evolutionary biology as a means to try to support a theological conclusion. Same with Dennis Noble. That's what he's paid to do.
Can I just add a little point about the history here? Common ancestry was an idea that was known. In fact, universal common ancestry was an idea that goes back hundreds of years, well over 1,000 years. So Darwinian evolution to believe in the mechanism of natural selection and random mutations creating mind and body has nothing to do with the history of life. You could believe in the bush of life, you could believe in the net of life, you could believe in the tree of life. It doesn't actually matter. It is
That's
not
why we get other evidence.
It is not a necessary and sufficient condition of to believe in common ancestry. Therefore, Darwinian evolution is true. This is a non sequitur fallacy.
That's why we get other evidence.
Look, you're not understanding my point. Maybe I'm going to ask James here. Maybe he's going to understand this better because we debated this, right? You can believe in common ancestry and reject Darwinism. Do you agree with that point, James?
Well, Dave can respond to that.
I mean, yeah, you can.
Know the answer. That's why.
Huh? You can have. Yeah, you can reject certain mechanisms and favor other ones that would result in common ancestry. Fine, if you want to. That's ridiculous, but.
Okay, let me repeat the question.
2 minutes left.
I answered your question. Stop pretending I didn't answer your question.
I'm gonna ask once more. The history of evolution is distinct from the mechanism. The tree of life is the history of evolution. The mechanism is natural selection plus random mutations creating mind and body. Do you agree these are two different ideas?
Yeah, in the sense of an individual organism, the development of an individual organism versus the history of life on Earth. Sure.
Is this a necessary and sufficient condition to believe in this one?
No, I don't know.
Thank you. Debate done.
Thank you. What?
Done. That's the point I was making, and you were not understanding.
You're not.
Why are you giving evidence for Darwinian evolution by citing common ancestry?
I didn't do that.
I invited you to a separate
debate. I didn't do that. Where did I do that?
Look, go back to Muhammad Ali's channel. Go back to Muslim Language channel.
When I said that Darwinian evolution factually occurs, I cited mutations in bacteria. I cited Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. I'm responding to the dumb thing you said. You're trying to prevent me. Thanks for muting him. I said, as evidence for evolution by natural selection, I was citing mutations in bacteria producing antibiotic resistance. That's something we observe, right? That's Darwinian evolution by natural selection. I didn't bring up common ancestry as evidence for Darwinian evolution. I'm talking about mechanisms that we can observe today, and then we can extrapolate that into the past, and then we find other evidence from the fossil record, paleontology, biological anthropology, all these other things. You're correct. It's not just, evolution happens now, so it happened in the past. We have other sciences for that. We have other fields of science to build up all this evidence for a case for common ancestry. That's why it's a completely different topic, but we were talking about Darwinian evolution. So what's the problem?
A quick response from Sabur, and then we'll move to closing remarks.
So, James, I invited him to have a separate debate on universal common ancestry because I knew he was going to gish gallop, and Darwinian evolution, and I defined these terms separately. But in the environmental selection of the debate, where he's been neutered, where he's been domesticated and deselected, he can't.
Everyone watching is laughing at you right now, Sabur.
Tell the difference between the two of them. He simply cannot. And he's
you titled the debate "Is Darwinian Evolution a Fact?" and then your entire opening statement had nothing to do with the title of the debate, and then you got mad at me for having an opening statement about the title of the debate. How insane is that? It's ridiculous. Everyone is laughing at you right now.
That doesn't make any sense because I was using Dennis Noble's definition of neo-Darwinism.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to bring it to an end.
Neo-Darwinism. Is neo-Darwinism the same as Darwinism? No. Sabur, answer the question. No.
Sorry, gentlemen. So that concludes our 30 minutes of moderated discussion. So each of the speakers will have 2 minutes closing remarks. So first will be Sabur with his 2 minutes.
Okay, 1 second. So firstly, this debate is about neo-Darwinism. This debate is about the modern synthesis. What we saw here is that Farina was claiming it came together, neo-Darwinism came together in the 1920s. It didn't. Modern synthesis came 70 years later, 1990s. It didn't. You cannot use these terms interchangeably. You can. He called Dennis Noble a complete clown. He could not actually understand the 4 pillars, which Dennis Noble actually challenged. He could not stay with the discussion when it came to causality, the 4 distinctions of Aristotle. And he couldn't actually even understand the distinction between the blind watchmaker and the one-eyed watchmaker, and why it is that Dennis Noble's perspective directly challenges the blind watchmaker. So tonight, he has been neutered, domesticated, deselected, shown to be a coward, and shown to be incoherent. And what I'm looking forward to actually is to debate him again on universal common ancestry, and let's see how he does. And I bet he won't accept the challenge and he'll run away. Like I had to stand on my own in Brunel and give a talk, I'll have to chase this coward down for another day.
Okay, and Dave, you have 2 minutes.
This is just hilarious. The very first sentence out of his mouth was, "This debate is about neo-Darwinism. It's about the modern synthesis." Then why the fuck didn't you call the debate that, you moron? Why didn't you say, "I want to have a debate about my daddy, Dennis Noble. I want to talk all about Dennis Noble and all of the things that I think he says and how they magically challenge the current evolutionary paradigm." If that's what you wanted to talk about, you should have named the debate that. You didn't do that because you didn't want me to be prepared to talk exhaustively about Dennis Noble, which certainly I could do at another date. And all of this blustery talk about, oh, I stood alone. You didn't set up a debate. You wanted to pretend there was a debate, and then you didn't set one up. You said there was. I talked to everybody at the student union and the university who has anything to do with setting up events. They had no idea what I was talking about. You set up a date for you to go give a talk to the Muslim Society over there. So in conclusion, this has just been an entire farce. Sabur refuses to concede the title of the debate. Darwinian evolution factually occurs. He's doing nothing but obfuscating, pointing at what other people say because he's incapable about talking about these concepts, and he certainly cannot explain how anything that Daddy Dennis Noble says contradicts the mechanisms that are understood in evolutionary biology. And in fact, doesn't even know what job he has. He's not an evolutionary biologist. He's a physiologist paid by the Templeton Foundation. And certainly, I think I'm going to do some content really thoroughly exposing Dennis Noble. So look forward to that. Otherwise, that's about it.
All right, that concludes our debate for today. So thanks everyone for coming. And I also give my thanks to both of our speakers. So Sabur and Dave, thanks very much for participating. So that will conclude the proceedings today. Take care, everyone, and I hope you found this interesting.